Just thought I should point out I have 3 cups of coffee. Not as in like I prepared 3 cups, more like in the sense that like I filled 1 cup and then I filled another. I filled another cup. Ow, that was a mistake. They put handles on the mugs for a reason, and I filled another cup. So I have actual like 3 physical mugs in a line right off camera that are filled with coffee in preparation for when I need them, because this video it's gonna be a little bit of an intense one, and you know. So last time we spoke, it was on the subject of the latest Zelda game, Breath of the Wild, or as I fittingly put it using multiple decibels, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. Sorry about that, by the way. The most feedback I got on that whole video was about how annoyed people got when I jokingly like upped the volume at that part. I swear I'll never do that again. But it's that lack of feedback that's brought us together again today. You see, something I thought was expressed pretty clearly in the introduction of that video didn't seem to get picked up properly. The fault's probably on me. I maybe should have been a little bit more explicit in what I was trying to say, but hey, that's what today's for. As you can probably tell from the title of this video, we're going to be talking about the word depth for a bit. Now, we will talk about the concept of depth across various domains, but you heard me right. We're actually going to talk about the word itself today. So depth is a 5-letter word and is commonly found in the D section of a dictionary. Quick trivia here, the D section also houses the word definition, which is crazy to think about. I mean, they had to go through all of the A, B, and C words before they even defined what they were actively doing. That's mighty bananas. So let's get caught up on the definition of definition, you know, for those of you who don't know. Let's see the Oxford Dictionary. Definition, a statement of the exact meaning of a word, especially in a dictionary. And you know what, just for good measure, let's check the Funkin' Wagnalls. Definition, an explanation of a word or thing that distinguishes it from all other things. Ah, perfect. So the idea of the definition being exact, of it distinguishing its subject from all other things, that's the key I want you to hold on to. Now, if you've ever taken a specialized writing course, you might be familiar with something called a technical definition. This is a definition style or format used when describing technical concepts or objects in a way that can be stood without any required held knowledge. There's some crappy rules involved in them, like you can't use composing words within the technical definition. So, for example, in defining a corkscrew, you'd neither be allowed to use the word cork or screw. You'd have to define those 2 terms within the definition itself. It's also common practice to begin by stating the domain in which the word is being defined. So for example, in the area of kitchen tools, a corkscrew is yada yada yada. Or in the field of aerobatic maneuvers, a corkscrew is a bing bang boom, you know? Alternatively, if you wish to or are left with no other choice, you can keep other complex and technical terms and concepts in the description as long as you also provide their reference technical definitions either before or after. It's kind of the same idea as a Wikipedia article. Every word that isn't guaranteed to be familiar to the reader has its own definition or article referenced. Now, the way it was taught in my courses was that there's really a single important purpose that a technical definition must fulfill. I thought I'd have to like present the same argument I was given in school, but speaking of Wikipedia, the Wikipedia page for technical definition includes exactly what I was hoping it would. So Wikipedia, my boy, what are technical definitions used for? Ah, they're used to introduce the vocabulary which makes communication in a particular field succinct and unambiguous. All my ladies, let me see you put a twist Ambiguity is the nemesis of definition and order. It's the reason, for example, most large-scale projects include a glossary. The last thing you want is a whole team where everybody uses a different word to describe the same thing in their communications, especially when you're talking about like international teams, stuff like that. Setting up at the earliest point strict and clear naming and definition conventions is critical in anything that really wants to take itself seriously. So in the last video, though I didn't say it explicitly, what I was trying to imply was that the definition of depth commonly used by those in games writing was bad due to ding 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 ambiguity. I mentioned the fact that in using concepts from graph theory, words such as depth and breadth already have definitions. To not use those definitions is a mistake. Let's take a look for a minute at some definitions of depth specifically in the field of games that people have produced. Shout out to Chris, aka Critpoints, for sharing a ton of glossaries with me a while back. I should point out that he does not agree with anything I'm trying to say here, but he pointed me in the right direction a while ago for some stuff I was looking for. I should also highlight the fact that his glossary Glossary's definition of depth is very different from mine, which I'll provide more formally later, but is still a thing. I just label it with a different word, but we'll get to that in a bit. So this definition of depth comes from critical-gaming.com's Critical Glossary of Game Terms. Actually, what's of interest to us is the second paragraph, the gameplay depth part. I can't really complain about the first part because, yes, artistic works do have their own definition of depth. This is true, but here's what's written. Gameplay depth/meaning mainly revolves around interplay. Because games are interactive systems with goals or goal-like objectives, every action and situation can be evaluated according to how well it achieves victory. In other words, the meaning, or depth, of gameplay comes from goal-seeking interactivity. Now, we're going to play the role of a teacher grading this definition. In the last video, I said to look out for certain graph and network-related words in people's definition of depth in games. Here, our eyes should catch interplay, interactive systems, and interactivity. These sorts of words, like we said, imply relationships between parts of a system, interactions between features, because games are interactive systems. They are sets of some features that interact with some other features. They are a class diagram. They are a domain model. Features are nodes, possible interactions are edges. We have nodes, we have edges, we have a graph. So here's the source of ambiguity. Full disclosure, you might disagree with me on whether or not this is actually ambiguous, though in a funny way that would actually kind of reinforce the ambiguity argument. The fact that at least two people can disagree proves that it's ambiguous. If everyone agreed with me, well, I guess there wouldn't be any uncertainty, though I guess that's kind of paradoxical. Maybe I'm completely wrong. So the definition provided uses other technical terms that imply that the logic of my favorite theory, graph theory, are being included. Problem: graph theory already has an unambiguously established definition of depth. So the question reads, can you use concepts from a knowledge base to redefine words already defined within that knowledge base? Here's where I'm throwing a little opinion in here. No, I think that's illegal. You might not think so, but you at least have to admit that it's kind of shady and not a good practice for definition writing. This is at least something like a definition smell, you know, a logical pattern that's recognized as being bad. Maybe not illegal, but at least bad. I mean, go back to the definitions of definition. Doing something like this means you are not giving an exact meaning of the word. You are not distinguishing this depth from all other things, in particular classical graphical depth. The knowledge set required to understand your definition of depth includes a definition of depth. I think that's the clearest way I can possibly explain this. So why did I call it illegal though? Well, because while it might technically work in a definition in like English, some languages actually prevent you from defining things like this. Programming languages specifically. Before you go off hollering me saying, oh, programming languages aren't real languages, hold up. Consider for a second that there's a reason they're called languages and not just something like command syntaxes. There are semantics involved here. Programs are just representation of logical concepts after all. They're just two steps of abstraction away from natural language descriptions of problems. So I think the comparison is just. I really hope this example doesn't go over too many people's heads, but like structuring definitions like this is like importing a library into your project and then redefining one of its classes or methods without inheritance or an override. Like, it's not like the definition here acknowledges the existence of another definition of depth within itself. It just kind of tries to hijack it inappropriately. You know what would happen if you tried to compile a program with this structure? It would fail. That's a reference issue. It's a dependency problem. You can't structure a definition to be dependent upon another library that itself defines that word. Unfortunately, though, English doesn't need to be able to compile properly before being executed. That's why we get stuff like this. You know, maybe a more approachable example is the Wikipedia one. Say this definition here of depth was a Wikipedia page, and the word interactivity would link you to another Wikipedia page, which, after some traversal, you'd eventually get to a page on graphs and network theory. That page would then link you to a page on depth, but that page on depth wouldn't be the original depth that you came from, it would be another depth. So now you have two articles with the same title. You have one word referencing another thing, which references that same word, but with an alternative definition. That's no good. You see how that's wrong, right? As a result of this inappropriate dependency structure, this definition of depth, by the definition of definition, is definitely ambiguous. Does it mean that it's meaningless? Absolutely not. A quick way to instantly eliminate the ambiguity would be to simply change the word, call it something else. I mean, the fact that the library you're importing for your definition already uses that word is kind of an indication right there that this is the inappropriate word for this definition. This meaning doesn't match the word that you're using to describe it. Maybe you should actually think about what you're talking about and find the right word for it. Find out what it actually is. Depth already has a meaning, the same one in networks, in software, and in mechanical and logical interactions within games. This is not depth. This is something else. You're talking about like interplay and stuff, multiplication? That's probably multiplicative complexity. It's not depth. Please stop inappropriately using that word. Now, the other thing about depth in games is how many other definitions there are for it. You talk to like 10 people, you're gonna get 10 different definitions of depth. It's just kind of like this word that people apply to things that maybe they don't really understand when, you know, it kind of does have a strict meaning already set. For example, one of them you might have heard goes something like this. Alright, so you got the super skilled and knowledgeable players up here, right? And you've got the crap noob players down here, yeah? Well, this distance, that's depth. Sometimes this definition also includes something about the depth of the interactions known to or available to more experienced players being greater than that of the new players, and you know what? That absolutely makes sense. The idea is that the better you are, the deeper the strategies or interactive actions you're able to execute. Now, I don't necessarily have an issue with this definition because in its two forms, the first being the one where the graph definition of depth is not included and the second being the one where it is, it's either a game-specific description of the word, which is totally safe, totally cool by everyone, or it's not inconsistent with the actual graphical depth. I mean, think about it. If a new player is someone who knows only surface level interactions at a depth of 0 or 1, and a veteran player is a player who can reach interactions at the maximum depth level, then this distance is just the maximum depth level, which is just depth. So that's completely fine, that's completely consistent with what I'm saying. It's just an alternative way of representing it for games. What you've got to do is learn to spot the difference between redefinition and definition extension or augmentation. Here we're talking about interactivity moving forward. We're talking actual depth. It's just been properly described within the context of gaming. Yeah, the skill gap between the most skilled player and the least skilled player is a function of the game's graphical depth. It's all good. We're extending the graphical definition here. We're not contradicting it. We're using, or in structural terms, inheriting it and expanding upon it within the domain we want. This is 100% legal and serves to reduce ambiguity. But here we're talking about the total interactivity between all features, the set of edges in a graph somehow being depth. We're taking a piece of our foundation and trying to override its meaning and function with what is actually just complexity, you know, n times n minus 1. This is not depth. This has more to do with breadth. That's what I was trying to say in the last video. On to coffee number 2. I just threw I threw coffee into my mouth. That was a mistake. Freaking Christ. People use the word depth a lot, and they mostly use it inappropriately. When they bring up graphical concepts in their explanation, there's actually always a better word to use than depth. So what I'm saying is, why not use another more appropriate term? Why inject this ambiguity into your works and into the minds of your audiences? I should sound like a broken record at this point, but depth is a thing that already exists. Leave it alone. Stop ripping the page out of the Funkin' Wagnalls and try to come up with an actual term for what you're trying to describe, which is arguably not depth. So yeah, I'm tilted over the misuse of a single word. Now, the criticism that I've already received, and frankly am expecting to hear more of, is the following. What I'm talking about here, the classical definition that I associate with depth, isn't the popularly supported one. Most people use the complexity-based one instead when talking about games. And because of that, the word is essentially given this meaning instead. Basically, everyone says depth is this, so depth is this. While that may be true, I don't care. I'm not concerned with what most people are saying. I don't care about popularity. My concern when it comes to this is correctness. Just because a lot of people say or think a certain thing doesn't mean that they're right. I think I've done a pretty decent job explaining how the word is currently being used incorrectly in a way that fosters ambiguity up to this point. If you really care about criticizing anything here today, that's the angle you'll have to come at it from. Though I don't know if it's possible to argue that it's unambiguous given the evidence, given the dependency issue. That wasn't my opinion, that was more of like a proof. If you're fine accepting the popular meaning of depth, that's up to you, that's your choice. But just know that that has no impact on what I'm saying about its correctness. So my goal here today is to provide you with my technical, maybe not definitions, but I'll call them explanations of depth and breadth in games. First though, as these definitions will reference them, as they are dependent on them, I need to give you my descriptions of complexity and gameplay. All of this will be founded in informatics and software engineering stuff, so cool your jets. This is not just like me just coming up with stuff out of nowhere, like the foundation behind what I'm about to describe. Aside from my description from gameplay, which is, I guess, a little bit of opinion coming from me, but it is something I would call something else in like traditional software, and I think that when you map like traditional software over to games, that thing that I would call what I'm gonna call gameplay would be gameplay. So, and I know that I just said this, and you just. So you know what? I'll just talk. I mean, I'm not talking about SpongeBob, so nobody's paying attention, right? Oh, shots fired right at your direction, and they bounced right back, hit me in the face. I'm dead. Hey, at least in hot, keep the coffee hot, huh? It's freaking cold now. So complexity, as we touched on in the last video, is the total interactions possible within a system. Algorithmic time and space complexity are always measured in terms of the worst case, the most complex case. The notation for this is called big O. The complexity of like a whole system can be seen as like the complexity of an algorithm that's able to do a complete integration testing run. That's to say that it's able to traverse every edge and observe the interactions between every set of nodes or features. In the worst case, all nodes are attached to each other and themselves. So the big O complexity of a fully connected system is n squared, where n is the number of nodes. Say e is the number of edges and e equals n squared, e is our system's complexity. Pretty boring stuff, right? Yeah, that's because this definition of complexity has nothing to do with games. This is the complexity of any sort of software system. So here's where we get into the game stuff. Gameplay. But like I said before, this definition can be applied to normal software. If I were defining this in the context of just any software that wasn't games, I would probably call it valuable complexity. That's probably the word I would give it. But when you cross the gap into games, valuable complexity is gameplay. So I'm going to explain that now. So games and other software, in that worst case, have a complexity of n squared, right? Of that complexity though, not everything offers immediate value to players or users. Now in Agile, which is a project process, you have this concept of user stories. I believe I've explained this in a previous video, probably the game ratings one. These are short stories about interactions between the system and some class of actor, and they're always formatted the same way. As a user, I am able to upload a video to YouTube. As a player, I am able to swing a sword. These stories are not atomic. They can absolutely be broken down into smaller tasks that make them up. In Agile methodologies though, only actual user stories are allowed to have their complexity estimated, which is maybe a problem in some cases, but sometimes works. The idea is that only stories that add value to the user matter. Things like, as a user I can click the upload button, or as a player I can press the button on the controller. Those don't really matter, they're not stories, they're hardware or platform specific. User stories are a little bit more abstract. They're things that can be done. They don't include how those things are done. So, as a player, I'm able to perceive visuals, or as the system, I'm able to render visuals to the screen. Those aren't user stories. They make up part of the complexity, sure, but I mean, every feature of the game needs to be tied to some sort of graphics supernode, right? But this doesn't bring immediate value to the user. So what I say gameplay is it's the subgraph of the full complexity graph of a system that is part of at least one actual user story. As a player, I can throw my boomerang. Any node or edge related to that story remains. As a user, I can use my special ability. those nodes and edges stay too. In other words, gameplay is the subset of complexity that has to do with actual valuable aspects of the game. Things that are platform, hardware, and software independent. Gameplay is a subgraph that represents the essence of the game. Not the class diagram, but rather one level of abstraction higher. The domain diagram. The complexity of this graph, the total number of interactions possible within the gameplay logic, is the scope or scale of the gameplay. Still n squared in the worst case. This, of course, is the description of the noun gameplay, not to be confused with the act of gameplay. Like a game's gameplay is this, but gameplay is also the act of playing a game. I think that goes without saying, but I'm just covering my bum at this point. Also, I just thought I should point out that this meaning for gameplay is what some people refer to as their meaning of depth. Chris's pretty popular definition of depth, for example, is consistent with what I'm calling gameplay. He says, depth is the number of non-redundant states that are relevant to a player or group of players. Depth is the effective complexity of the game, the measure of complexity that actually makes a difference relative to players. Makes a difference relative to players. Another way of saying that is adds value to players. Since pure complexity is not a good judge of a game's quality alone, depth exists as a term to find how complex a game is relative to the players. So this is exactly what I'm talking about when I say gameplay is anything that has to do with a user story. And then he goes on, but he comes back to say, the aim of game design is in part to emphasize and make relevant as many states as possible, while having them remain distinct from one another. This is the conversion of complexity into depth. I would say, though, that each user story is kind of a piece of gameplay. Each user story is a story about gameplay. So I think what I would say is that you're converting complexity into user stories that are gameplay. You're converting complexity into gameplay. This is extremely well written and described. Just replace every instance of depth with gameplay and I'm right behind it. My issue, again, is very surface level. It's just that depth is not the right word for this. Forget about it already having a definition, but depth doesn't carry with it any notion of interaction. Gameplay obviously does. Gameplay is user stories. Like, pure complexity is not a good judge of a game's quality alone. Depth exists as a term to find how complex a game is relative to players. First of all, I don't think depth has anything to do with quality, but what I'm trying to say here is, wouldn't gameplay be such a more appropriate word to insert here? Like, in the same way user stories are non-redundant and non-trivial subsets of complexity that offer actual value to users in all other software, can't we say gameplay instead is the non-redundant subset of complexity of a game systems that offer value to players? Like in traditional software, if you replaced user stories with depth, you'd be wrong. The game equivalent of user story, though, is gameplay interaction, something like that. Gameplay, being a graph, has its own depth, but gameplay is not just depth. It's really just terminology we have a problem with here. Hey, you know what? If Chris is allowed to famously have an issue with the use of the word immersion, I think I'm allowed to get triggered over depth. My issue with like the level of ambiguity surrounding the word depth is equivalent to, I guess, the ambiguity that Chris sees when he looks at immersion. You know what somebody said to me? Somebody said that somebody accused me of purposefully spoiling games that I didn't like to ruin the experience for other people. Somebody said this about Metal Gear Solid 5. Here's my problem. This guy in his comment explained that he had just recently bought Metal Gear Solid 5. Monsieur, you just bought the game. Why are you watching like a 54-minute video about the game you just bought if you don't want to know anything about it? Guess what? Don't watch a 54 freaking minute video about Metal Gear Solid 5 if you don't want to know about it. How hard is that? Honestly, you know, being involved in like this whole SpongeBob community, you see a lot of really bad comments. But that comment, I think, was the one that kind of surprised me the most. That somebody could be that offended at having the, like, okay, I don't think I need to say spoiler warning, because first of all, the video came out, like Metal Gear Solid had been out for like a year. I think at that point you can say whatever the heck you want to say about the game. But secondly, it's just look at the length of the video. What do you think I'm going to talk about? You think I'm not going to talk about what happens in the game? You want to put a little spoiler warning for you? Don't watch the video. Why are you I still, at this point, I have friends who've made videos about The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, and I feel like a jerk for not supporting them because I've not watched anybody's videos. I've stayed away from so much crap in the hopes that like I don't have the experience ruined for me. I've tried not to talk about the game with people I know who are still going through their first playthrough. That comment just blew me away. It was like taking a shotgun to the face. It's like being behind yourself and looking at yourself cry. onto the third cup. So the definitions of depth and breadth in games, well, I already gave the graphical definitions in the last video, and it's just the same definition of that, except it's the graphical depth of the gameplay graph and the graphical breadth of the gameplay graph. So what I'm saying depth is, that description of it is dependent on your understanding of what depth is in a graph and your understanding of what the graph of gameplay looks like, and depth is just the depth of that graph. Same goes for breadth. What I feel is important, though, about preserving the graphical definitions or the graphical meaning of depth and breadth is that you can now use them to break down other parts of a game, to break down the structure of other pieces of a game, of individual parts of a game that you want to look at. Which is what I'm finally going to do with The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild at this point in the video. Let me preface this by saying I did complete Breath of the Wild recently, and spoiler warning, I'm going to be discussing the ending right now. But if you watched my Final Fantasy XV video in which I described popular ending techniques in open world games, then you'll be familiar with the weak ending type that has kind of plagued Zelda for a while. I mean, I know it doesn't bother everyone, but it bugs me. I think it kind of harms the player's immersion and suspension of disbelief for the rest of the game. It did literally exactly what I said was bad in that video. Like, you beat the game, the ending is kind of lackluster, no serious impact on the world of the game. You get this long celebratory cutscene, yada yada, the game takes you back to this title screen, and you continue your save, and you're literally right in front of the door to the final boss. Ooh, see you later, Ganon. I actually forgot to get some more seeds and find a new horse, and I'll catch you later, Zelda. You can hold on a little bit longer, huh? I mean, it was the worst. Straight up, just facing the end of the castle and just doing a 180 and bouncing out of there. It was so wimpy, especially just like hearing that like epic triumphant music come back in, like, ooh, look at me, I'm in the castle, and then you're just like, ooh, look at me, I'm leaving the castle. It's like, come on. I was really hoping they wouldn't do that. I mean, like, the ending itself was cool. I really liked the victory lap sort of thing they let you do with like the super Ganon, but reloading that save and being forced to walk all the way out of the castle, having it stay there, always visible in the distance for the rest of your gameplay experience, that kills it, dude. That's so freaking lame. Into the serious stuff, first let's talk about progression. Your progression through both the story and game is completely non-linear and is the perfect example of breadth first design. Yeah, that's what I'm gonna call it. See, like, if you just model the game's progression events and states as a graph, you can see that it's basically all breadth. From the root, the only thing you're forced to do is the introductory phase, which serves as tutorial. After that, literally everything the game has to offer is opened up to you immediately. Including only events relevant to reaching the end of the game, you can either, well, immediately enter the castle and fight Ganon, the goal state you're looking for a path towards, or you can complete any of the 4 Divine Beast dungeons if you want. Nothing else really impacts the ending. I mean, not even getting the Master Sword has any direct effect on the progression of the game. You don't need it, and if you decide to get it, you can get it whenever. What's really cool, though, is that exploring any of these states, completing any of the Divine Beasts, doesn't change the progression of the game. If you choose to do a Divine Beast, the next depth level expanding from that node will simply include all of the nodes from the breadth of the parent node minus itself. In other words, if you do the Water Temple, once you do it, everything is left but the Water Temple. This is completely contrary to how Zelda has been handling progression for a very long time in these more linear and deep setups. Linear progression is depth. You must first do the intro, then the first temple, then the second temple, so on and so forth until the end. Despite being in pseudo-open worlds, past 3D Zelda's main progression tasks have always been a deep, predetermined, ordered set of events. As you can see directly in the graphs, old Zelda's progression might be deeper, but Breath of the Wild's breadth-focused progression offers not just a single path to the goal state, but many. There are various combinations in which you can either complete or not complete quests that will have you visiting states that have an impact on the final boss battle. This, I would argue, is one of the game's strongest assets. By providing many completion paths, the game has much more replayability. I mean, think about it. What's the point of replaying Twilight Princess? There isn't. It's just going to be the same thing all over again. I know I complained about the ending here being bad, that running out of the castle for the post-game kind of sucks. But you know, I think it's forgivable because of this. I don't think the point of beating Breath of the Wild is to continue afterwards. I think the point is to restart eventually and try to play the whole game completely differently. That's what I personally like about the game's ending, the very open-ended progression. I think that the value of this sort of replayability is much greater than that of the actual ending. It's really cool. See that right there? That's why I like to use the graph stuff. Without being able to use words like depth and breadth with their actual meanings, you can't discuss or model stuff formally like this. Instead of saying, you know, old Zelda is linear, this Zelda is great because it's non-linear, you can just draw the graph and be like, look at the breadth, look at the depth, compare, you know? It's like, I don't know, I just think anything that allows you to be more expressive and model the structure of a game's progression, for example, or any part of a game, I think that that's something that should be preserved and should be used. It's much more expressive than just the word linear or non-linear. Now, I also wanted to talk about the dungeons, the divine beasts themselves. So hopefully you watch Mark Brown from Game Maker's Toolkit. Anyways, he has this series called Boss Keys, where he explores the design of the dungeons in the Zelda series across, you know, all the titles. He made up this diagramming system to present progression in them. It's a pretty neat tool. He uses it to show how some dungeons offer many solutions, whereas others always include a single critical path. Now, he hasn't reached Breath of the Wild yet, but that video of his might be out before this one. But going off of what he's made for his previous graphs, I can kind of already tell what his images will look like in that video and what he'll probably have to say about them. Very similar to the progression of the story, each dungeon, you know, first forces you to reach an important control panel, but then opens up and asks you to access 5 terminals. Unlike the optional dungeons in the main quest progression, these terminals are not optional. You need to get all of them if you want to actually complete it, though the order doesn't matter. So what's crazy is, you know, you walk into this dungeon, right, like in old Zeldas. You go in, and most of the time there's like one main path to follow. You always get enough keys for the doors you need, and overall it's a pretty easy time. Here, instead, you have 5 isolated puzzles to solve independently of each other. There aren't any locked doors. There's no point at which one terminal needs to be activated before another. You can do whichever you want, whenever you want. It's at this point I would like to personally thank Myles J Berrin from Twitter at Myles J Berrin, and his channel is called American Hideki Kamiya. Me being an idiot, I captured footage of the water temple, and then I did the fire temple when I started deciding that I wanted to make a follow-up video for this, but I kind of did that temple before I realized that I maybe should have recorded it. I recorded all the other temples, but I really missed the fire temple, and the fire temple was so critical to it was during the fire temple that I came up with the ideas. But if I could recommend one video to you guys from him, it would be his Metal Gear Solid 5 video, because assumably if you're here, you have at least some interest in Metal Gear Solid 5. And he offers a somewhat different view than I do. I think we both mostly agree with a lot of the pretty bad things about the game. I know we both talked about that one really exploitable strategy that you can use in Metal Gear Solid 5 that's not the best. But he's completed the game like a ridiculous number. He's like not just completed, but like 100% of the game a ridiculous number of times. And that's kind of the premise of that video and like some of the stuff he's learned there. So if I could recommend a video to you, it would absolutely be his Metal Gear Solid 5 one. So check him out, show him some love. He really helped out with this one of, you know, providing me with the footage of the one temple I needed. I would also like to send love to somebody else because I need footage of the water temple in Twilight Princess, and at the moment of recording, I haven't figured out who's gonna send that to me. Actually, you know what? I just found out who it is. I just found out. Yeah, so it's myself. Actually, it turns out I captured the footage myself. Nobody had any stock footage of this game or was able to capture any footage of it. And look at me, the idiot here. I have this whole perfect gag set up where I'm bobbing my head with the gas mask for like 5 minutes pretending I'm talking so that I could insert literally anybody else's name. And I'm the only one who could. I'm the one who did it. So wow. I hate everyone. What a sad life. Yeah, so, like I said, major thanks to myself, who I just talked about. The move towards non-linearity, towards breadth, clearly affected the design of the dungeons. In previous games, each room kind of housed its own puzzles. From time to time, certain rooms would contain some sort of control that could affect the other rooms. For example, the water temple in Twilight Princess, whose central staircase can be used to guide the flow of water and also to open new paths for the player to explore. Still, most puzzles existed as a means of progression. You must get through this room and then go to the next. You must figure out and complete the challenge in this room to do that. In these dungeons, though, there are no rooms. It gives every aspect of the temple a sense of connectivity. Instead of isolated puzzle rooms all strung together, each dungeon includes some sort of control that alters the entire map all at once. No specific items or tools are needed, just this ability to move some part of the beast and all of the powers you're given from the start. The design of these dungeons embodies breadth. Like one control that changes the whole place. The whole entire freaking place. One control. One capability that opens up all of the necessary paths to all of the individual objectives all at once. The fire temple is the one where it's the clearest. When you rotate the lizard, the entire map is changed. Not just the room you're currently in. It's not just like an individual puzzle room. It's the entire place. When you rotate the lizard, you're moving everything and you're changing your relationship with every sub-area. I mean, in both the elephant and bird temples, you can use the control simply for navigation around the place. Like, you can use the trunk to jump off and glide to your desired area. Or you can get some good timing on a jump off the moving wing of the bird to land yourself where you want to get. One feature, one control, multiple uses for various mandatory and optional treasure goals. I should point out though that you don't lose that linear aspect of the old Zeldas. That's kind of what the shrines are for. You want independent little puzzle rooms? Well, why throw them into a temple? Why are you gonna put all of these rooms in a single structure if they don't actually all interact together? So that's why it's cool that the dungeons are completely open. They're wide open, but you still have these independent, puzzle rooms. The only thing is that they're completely separate from each other, which makes more sense if you look at their design. You have these shrines that are thrown all over the map that have nothing to do with each other, but they all offer you the same sort of challenge that the individual rooms in the dungeons or the temples in the previous Zeldas offer you. So it's not like they're taking away the linearity and just replacing it completely with breadth. They're giving you the linearity, but just in a different format. They're reformatting the way you play Zelda, and I think if you look at the design of the challenges and of the puzzles, it makes more sense this way. Twilight Princess's dungeons and progression embody depth, linearity. You do one thing after another after another. Breath of the Wild's dungeons and progression embody breadth, non-linearity. You do or do not do many things in any order using a small set of tools, and this provides deep and valuably complex gameplay scope. This is the same reason people got upset with Metal Gear Solid 5 and claimed to have more fun in Ground Zeroes. Camp Omega being used for multiple missions under varying conditions fostered gameplay that was deep and breadthy, giving it great multiplicative complexity, giving it great gameplay scale. Metal Gear Solid 5, on the other hand, only used most bases for a single main mission, giving it significantly much less depth and much more breadth. So while Ground Zero's gameplay is well balanced, Metal Gear Solid 5's is wide in scale but shallow. What Ground Zero's gameplay graph lacks in nodes, it makes up for in edges. There may not be that much there, but what is there is used to the fullest extent. Metal Gear Solid 5 might give you many different things to do, but does not give you many different ways to do them. If you're going to add breadth, you also have to add depth, or else the gameplay becomes imbalanced. Wait, why are we even talking about Metal Gear Solid 5? Forget about this. And you know what? That's really all I wanted to say. I hope you had a good time. Thanks for dropping by, and see you around, Jimmy. Hello and welcome to the Endscreen! First of all, thank you again to Myles. Myles kicked a freaking monkey. Yeah, thank you again to him. Like I said, check out his channel. Check out his Metal Gear Solid 5 video. Maybe now with my little Metal Gear Solid 5 ending remark, you're like on a Metal Gear Solid 5 high and you're like, I need more! So maybe you can watch that. If you are anybody who has made a video about Breath of the Wild, I'm gonna watch all the videos now. I think I'm ready. That's life. Yeah, something I want to talk about. I think you've noticed now I've put 2 videos in a row out like this. The thing is, okay, so when I started making these videos, I kind of just always focused on like full feature coverage, but over the years I've kind of changed. I don't really just generally talk about games anymore. Oh my god. I think in the games rating, oh my god, this chair is so busted. I think it was in the game ratings video I talked about how I don't talk about a game anymore unless there's something I have to say about it. So that's kind of the way I do things now. I look for a main idea, and then I kind of just, I don't say anything unless it supports that idea or unless it's a build up for that idea. I take a game and, there's always got to be one really important thing to say about it. Otherwise, it's probably not a very good game. Or if it's a bad game, there should be one main reason as to why it's a bad game. Five Nights at Freddy's, it was the whole, I talked about software quality in that one. I wanted to do a whole other video focusing on software quality and testing. Kind of want to make fun of CJ from What's With Games. He's also in my sidebar thingy, so you can find his channel. I was working at one point on a video on testing, but then I met him and I was like, it'd be funny if I like parodied him. Because it basically what it is, like if he ever made like a what's with testing? It would basically be exactly the video I was trying to make. What am I talking about? Oh yeah, so the thing with these games now is like, I don't want to just, because this is the problem. I think this is what the SpongeBob stuff pushed. When people wanted me to talk about the SpongeBob games, they just want you to talk about everything. They just want you to talk about the game. They don't want you to talk about a specific thing. They want you to say everything. But I think I can do better than that. I think it's, and I think the video is more entertaining when there's like some narrative to it. I'm not just like, here's this game, let me just immerse myself in it and tell you everything there is to say about it. I think it's better when you have a subject, when you have a thesis, when you have something you're trying to say. So, well, last video was breadth, this one's depth. I think I've done that with other games. Metal Gear Solid 5 was mostly requirements. There's a lot of points where I just don't talk about the game. I think in Splatoon, I barely talked about anything like that had to do with actually like playing the game. I really just talked about community stuff, and everybody kind of liked that video a lot, so that made me happy. And yeah, so that's what it is with this. I'm not gonna sit here and tell you everything there is to know about Breath of the Wild. Number one, because I don't want to. And number two, because I think it's better for me to grab a specific thing and just run with it. And number three, because other people do a better job of that anyways. You want a full breakdown of Zelda? I haven't seen his video yet. I've seen his other Zelda videos. I haven't seen his Breath video, but King K, watch his video. He's the Zelda dude now. Watch Liam Triforce's video on all of the Zeldas, because the two of them were doing their Zelda thing at the same time. If you want like the full sort of thing, that's where you go. But yeah, I'm really interested in this sort of stuff now, because it's more fun to write too, because when you're writing just everything, it's hard not to split things into sections. I tried so hard with the movie game, and I'm really proud of how I managed to split it up. I managed to segue into things, which was a pain in the butt. But when you write like this, it's much easier. Like the flow of your presentation is so much better, because you know you have one idea, so it's easier to logically flow from one concept to the next, right? Because they're all linked in some way. There's a path to them, like a graph. You're not just jumping from one node to the next. There's always an edge. Always. So I'll tell you right now, one of the videos I'm planning is very similar to this. It's about Perfect Dark. I'm not going to say everything there is to say about Perfect Dark. At one point, a couple of years ago, I was going to, and I'm glad I didn't, because now it gives me the opportunity to say what I want to say about Perfect Dark. My video about Perfect Dark is going to be about difficulty in games, because Perfect Dark has a difficulty setting system that I don't know any other games that do it, really. I mean, other games kind of have taken aspects of it, but like Perfect Dark takes the sort of difficulty setting that it has like to the logical extreme, and it's a shame that most people haven't played Perfect Dark. So there will be a couple of side things in that video, but most of it will be about game difficulty. I'll be talking about other games, I'll be talking about Perfect Dark's game difficulty, and that's it. Because that's what it is to me. Like, if you throw Perfect Dark my way, now that I've replayed it as an adult, if you said, what's like the one most important thing about Perfect Dark, I'd say difficulty. Right there. Difficulty. Done. So that's kind of what I do with these videos now. I take the game and I say, what's the number one most important thing about this game that I want to express to somebody? And I pick that, and I fly with it, you know what I mean? Update on my relationship status with Hamish Black. Long story short, don't have one yet. I'm working on it. I'm assaulting Hamish Black on like every sensory level I can. Every sensory level I have access to. All of him. The problem with like looking up to someone like Hamish Black, because that's where it comes from. It obviously comes out of respect. But like the problem with looking up to someone like him is that he's approachable. This life we're living, let me tell you this. This life we're living is the craziest freaking life. I think we live at the perfect age. It'll never get better. The world will never get better than it is today. I think we're on a downhill slope. Well, I mean, I guess not everybody would disagree with that. But yeah. This is the thing about YouTube. I've said multiple times, I treat this as hobby mode. I don't care about like making money on YouTube, right? But you know what I do care about? I do care about growing so that I can have more of an impact, more of a ridiculous, over-the-top impact on weird people's lives, right? I wanna be able to influence. I wanna be able to go to like this Greek Freak Nation guy and be like, hey, because right now he has a deal with this other guy. I don't know if any of you guys know him, but his name is Sotiri. He makes Greek parody songs. But they have a deal, and he has like an official snapback with him. My goal is for you someday to go to GreekFreakNation.com and see like the LambHoot branded snapback. I just want like next level ridiculousness. Like, I don't care about being, well, I mean, I care a little bit about being taken seriously, but I'm mostly in it for the fun. I've always been in it for the fun. Like I've said, if YouTube ever stops being fun, I'll stop doing it. It's a hobby. Why do people do hobbies? Because they enjoy them. Why do I do this? Because I enjoy it. It's a hobby. And I just want to have as much ridiculous, over-the-top fun as I possibly can. So that's what I'm in here for. That's why I push the bar a little bit, maybe, when it comes to sensory overload on people named Hamish Black. I feel like I'd be just as like infatuated with Mark Brown if we knew what he looked like. You know what? That'll be it. Once we all together, because I'm bringing you in to this. You guys are guilty by association. But once we achieve Hamish Black, our next target for all-out social harassment is going to be Mark Brown. I'm saying it right now. Mark Brown is going to be the sequel to Hamish Black. Calling it, making it. It's going to be done. We're going to do it. So that's enough of that. I'm going to finish this coffee. I'm going to turn off the camera, and then I'm never going to edit this video. Thanks again to anybody who ended up providing me footage with this skata. And I'll see you guys next time.